Apologies for the delay. Your Excellency, Minister of Immigration, Excellencies, representatives of the embassies, distinguished guests, and dear friends. I would like to welcome you all in today's event and extend my thanks to all of you for being here. Today, as we all know, we are presenting Andrea Theophanous' book titled What Really Happened in Cyprus, a critical assessment since independence and the way forward. And the book is published by Hippasus Publications. My name is Yannos Katsourides. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Government and Politics at the University of Nicosia, and I will be coordinating the event for tonight. And before I introduce and give the floor to our distinguished speakers, I would like to say very briefly a couple of words about Andrea Theophanous, although I am pretty sure that we all know Andreas, many of us personally, but most importantly academically, as well as through his public interventions. I feel that I have to say a few things myself, and I will highlight three things that I think best describe Andreas throughout his career, but particularly maybe in the last 10 years that we have been cooperating ourselves as well. Professor Theophanous has been a relentless voice in shaping public debate and scholarly understanding in Cyprus, but also beyond. Through his work, he has consistently sought to articulate and enrich the narrative on the Cyprus problem, engaging both with its complexities and its wider regional and international dimensions. At the same time, he has advanced a deeper appreciation of political economy globally, but with particular insight into the Cypriot context as well, highlighting how economic forces and policies intersect with governance and society. Equally important, and that's the third thing, he has been tireless in his commitment to strengthening the role of think tanks in Cyprus, ensuring that independent research and informed analysis feature prominently on both the public agenda and the policy-making process of the state. Unfortunately, these last efforts still remain unanswered. Let me very briefly introduce the speakers. The event will begin with a welcoming address by Mrs. Ήρα Ιωάννου-Αιμιλιανίδου on behalf of Hippasus Publications, which unfortunately, due to a very personal problem, I will read her brief welcoming address. Then the book will be presented by Hárης Γεωργιάδης, President of the Parliamentary Committee of Foreign and European Affairs and former Minister of Finance of Cyprus Republic, and Andreas Mαυρογιάννης, Ambassador and former negotiator of the Greek Cypriot side. This will be followed by remarks from the author, Professor Andreas Theophanous. And once we're finished, everyone is very much invited into a welcoming reception, which will follow in the building next door on your right-hand side as you exit the building on the cafeteria. So I will now read the welcoming address by Ήρα Ιωάννου-Αιμιλιανίδου, and then I will give the floor to the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure and deep appreciation that I welcome you on behalf of Hippasus Publishing to the presentation of the English edition of the book, What Really Happened in Cyprus, a critical assessment since independence and the way forward, authored by Professor Andreas Theophanous. We are honored to continue our collaboration with Professor Theophanous, and we thank him once again for choosing our publishing house to release this significant and timely edition in English. His trust in us, not only for the original Greek version, but now for this expanded, updated publication, is something that we deeply value. We are also grateful to all of you who are here with us today, whether members of the academic community, the political and diplomatic world, students, journalists, or friends. Your presence honors us. A warm thank you to the distinguished speakers who will share their insights with us very shortly, and to the University of Nicosia and the Cyprus Center for European and International Affairs for their hospitality and support. The book offers more than just a historical overview. It is a comprehensive and critical examination of the Cyprus issue, analyzing the events and policies from the times of independence to the present day. With clarity and boldness, Professor Theophanous highlights the shifting negotiating frameworks, the impact of external powers, and the strategic dilemmas faced by the Republic of Cyprus. At Hippasus Publishing, we remain committed to supporting works that contribute meaningfully to public dialogue and critical thinking. We believe this book will serve as a valuable resource for scholars, policymakers, and engaged citizens alike in Cyprus, but very crucially beyond. Thank you once again for being with us and for honoring this important occasion with us. Ήρα Ιωάννου-Αιμιλιανίδου. Now, we will immediately proceed without any further delay to the presentation of the book, and I invite our first speaker, Χάρης Γεωργιάδης, Chairman of the Foreign and Relations Committee of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Cyprus.
Thank you, Professor Katsourides Tiarianos, ministers, Ambassador Mavrogiannis, Professor Theophanous, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing gives me more pleasure than participating in the launching of a new book, especially one which deals with the defining issue of our country, and more so during these strange times when political substance, I am afraid, is becoming very scarce, when image seems to be the currency that matters, when political stance is usually nothing more than a tweet or even a post on Instagram or TikTok, when the lively but civil exchange of ideas has become or is becoming out of fashion, and worst of all, when the toxic mix of social media, populism, and the messianic personalities are eroding the very foundations of liberal democracies. Writing a book, or even reading one, is like swimming against the tide. Doing the hard work of putting down thoughts and ideas and finding references which will add credibility to an assertion or an argument requires someone with strong convictions, a sense of duty, and the realization that the major political challenges are ahead of us. And this is exactly why Professor Theophanous should be commended, because through his writing, he is offering a public service. Ladies and gentlemen, maybe I do not agree with Andreas Theophanous on all points. Possibly we have different starting points when it comes to the Cyprus problem. And it would have been almost impossible to agree on everything given the long history and the successive episodes of this aging problem. But reading the book and also having the opportunity to have long discussions with Andreas, I can say that I agree with enough. And I do acknowledge that he makes his arguments in a rational, sensible, and well-documented manner. This is an excellent handbook on the Cyprus problem with rich references and a very good appendix. Ladies and gentlemen, what really happened in Cyprus is the title of this book. I would say that what happened in Cyprus in 1974 was a tragedy. A young republic with a very promising prospect faced calamity just 14 years after its establishment. In the words of Theophanous, Cyprus was not anymore the prosperous island. The future looked gloomy. There were thousands of dead, missing, wounded, and displaced people. Many others were searching for a new homeland in foreign countries. There were feelings of anger and bitterness even towards Greece. I would add that this was a tragedy that could have been avoided if only we were a bit wiser. By we, I refer to the Greek side, and it should be pointed out that the author also approaches the issue from a Greek perspective without allowing this, however, to create a bias. In fact, Theophanous is quite critical of successive Greek Cypriot leaderships. A good part of the book is indeed a critical assessment of the policies of all presidents from Archbishop Makarios onwards. I would say that his assessment is strict but fair. The book traces the path of events which led to the Turkish invasion and deals extensively with the efforts for a resolution which have been taking place on and off over the last half century. Here, one should point out to one of the main arguments of Theophanus, and namely that Turkey was never genuinely interested in resolution, even in the form of a federation, but rather in the consolidation of the occupation and the division as part of its broader national security perceptions. I agree with this assessment. It highlights the fact that the Cyprus problem is not so much a bicommunal issue. There is a bicommunal dimension, a bicommunal element, but it is more an issue of a division policy on behalf of a militarily powerful country against a smaller neighbor. Notwithstanding Turkish policy, I believe, however, that there were major policy miscalculations on our part. Missed opportunities, maybe not for a resolution, but at least opportunities to put Turkish policy to the test. One instance was the Western Plan of 1978. This came in the backdrop of the U.S. arms embargo imposed on Turkey by Congress soon after the invasion. Its lifting was matched by a commitment of the U.S. administration to undertake a major effort for resolution. It foresaw the agreement in principle on a bizonal, bicommunal federation, active engagement in dialogue, and most importantly, the return of Famagusta from the very beginning of the talks. The plan was hastily rejected from the Greek Cypriot side. I believe that the rejection of the plan entailed a serious tactical mistake is the position of the author. The Greek Cypriot side could have accepted the plan as a basis for negotiation by first demanding the return of Famagusta, and in the event that the Turkish side was negative, their responsibility would fall on Turkey. Regrettably, the opposite was allowed to happen, and Turkey was allowed to get off the hook. Another opportunity to really test Turkish policy came some 25 years later when Cyprus sealed its accession to the European Union and Turkey was desperately seeking to promote its own EU prospect as part of the effort of the AKP and Erdogan to gain the upper hand against the Kemalist elite. The fact that President Papadopoulos called for a new UN initiative just months before the actual accession of Cyprus, agreed to a binding arbitration and to a referendum without actually being ready to support the UN plan was a major policy failure. Papadopoulos believed that the Turkish side would continue its unyielding stance, writes Theophanus, and would once again be blamed for the ongoing problem. But circumstances had changed. The new Turkish Prime Minister had declared that Turkey would be 2 steps ahead. Even Rauf Denktaş was gradually sidelined, explains Theophanus. The outcome severely damaged the Greek Cypriot moral advantage and its ability to effectively impose some conditionality on Turkey's EU aspirations. Dear friends, the most important failure of policy of the Greek side was to assess the effect of time. Theophanus quotes Glafkos Keliridis, who as early as 1974 argued that the perpetuation of the problem and the passage of time would be against our interests. Keliridis was right, because conflicts which are not resolved in time are usually settled by the passage of time and the balance of power. Time and the shift of Erdogan away from Europe and the West and towards a more Islamist, nationalist direction, with a renewed revisionism and a readiness to project military power, leave us today with almost completely diminished prospects for resolution. In fact, I was quite pessimistic about the Grand Mondana effort even before it took place. I was much more pessimistic than President Anastasiadis. But I'm sure that Ambassador Mavrogiannis is in a much better position than me to comment on the Grand Mondana effort. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, time, but political effort on our behalf have also delivered some significant advantages for the Republic. Cyprus is a functioning liberal democracy with a relatively prosperous economy, an ability to conduct foreign policy, and most significantly, it is a full member of the European Union. It is these circumstances, also the positive ones for the Republic, but also a realization that an agreement on an overall solution is not near, which should guide our next steps. And I do believe that the most significant contribution of Andreas Theophanus through his new book is his support for a step-by-step approach. I share this belief. And I do believe that the notion that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, even though it has a very clear rationale as part of a negotiating tactic, will not allow us to make progress. Theophanus is advocating, without claiming to be over-optimistic about his suggestion, that making concrete steps in a direction that would improve the status quo is probably the only realistic way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I know the reservations. Any such initiative raises the risk of an indirect acknowledgement of the illegal regime. Doing nothing and further allowing time to pass will make this will make the further consolidation of partition an inevitability. So the approach of Theophanus of trying to engage in a give and take approach whilst maintaining our key negotiating positions and definitely the sovereignty of the Republic is one that could lead to some progress. And once again, I will repeat the very basic approach of Theophanus, which has a simple but very important rationale. We should be ready to accept anything which improves the current situation, but we should resist anything which will make it even worse. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Professor Theophanus, my congratulations once again for yet another contribution to this debate, and I encourage you all to read the book and to draw your own conclusions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Haris. And now the floor is for our next speaker, Mr. Andrea Theophanous. Andreas Mαυρογιάννης. Sorry. Yeah.
Good evening, ministers, excellencies, members of parliament, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to have been invited to contribute to the presentation of this seminal work by Andreas Theophanous. Andreas Theophanous is a Chalcenterus scholar. Behind an impressive number of papers and books, most of them dealing with the Cyprus issue, recent Cyprus history, Cyprus economy, Cyprus and the European Union. I will not mention here all his academic and other achievements and his, throughout the years, outstanding contribution to the ongoing reflection on issues pertaining to our country. The book we present today is to a certain extent the epitome of this long and solid commitment. It draws from all his previous work in order to present, as the subtitle says, a critical assessment since independence and the way forward. The book is divided into 8 chapters, each one of them dealing with a different dimension of the Cyprus issue. Such multidimensional approach reminds me of Mikhail Bakhtin's concept of polyphonic writing. It offers the reader an exceptional initiation to the various facets of the subject and of the questions involved. At the same time, Andreas never hesitates to take a position and present not only the facts and the events, but also the way he sees things, the conclusions he draws, and always express his opinions. So the reader is taken by the hand and guided through the meanders of the successive adventures of Cyprus since independence and until today. But he is also required to always have his eyes wide open, to question and challenge, to revisit established and inherited truths, and to reflect about our fate and about the existential question of how responsible are we for what happens to us, and to what extent could we take our lives in our hands and not to be at the mercy of waves created by others. The first part of the book, chapters 1 to 4, cover in chronological order 4 periods. First, the Cyprus problem from the creation of the Republic of Cyprus to the Turkish invasion. 2, from the acceptance of federation to the Ngali set of ideas. 3, the European option and the Annan plan. And 4, from the referendum on the Annan plan to the collapse in Gran Montana and the day after. The second part, chapters 5 to 8, is revisiting some essential elements and the role and impact of players and of the prevailing circumstances and context. Chapter 5 is a critical assessment of the policies on the Cyprus problem of all its presidents, the presidents of Cyprus. Chapter 6 is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the broader repercussions and the Cyprus problem. Chapter 7, the policies of the guarantor countries and other powers on Cyprus. And Chapter 8, the difficult circumstances and the possible options. We have then a series of important appendixes. documents that shaped or were shaped by the various phases of the developments in Cyprus. The book ends with a very rich bibliography, including both sources and works, and covering both printed publications, books, articles, documents, and newspapers, as well as electronic resources. Of course, the price to pay when a bibliography is so extensive is that one seeks exhaustivity and wonders why, for instance, authors like Atalidis, Kitromulidis, Tenekidis, Kranidiotis, Yanos Kranidiotis do not appear. Or, egoistically thinking, why my own articles in French in the mid-80s and after, during my own academic transfiguration, are missing. Nobody is perfectly perfect, of course, so I will bear with him and provide him with the necessary copies. Of course, I say this for fun and as a transition to my assessment of the work of Andreas Theophanus. I could not even think of comparing my fleeting investment in research with the deep, thorough, constant, and high-quality works of Andreas. He devoted his life and university career researching, teaching, writing, discussing, and contributing with all the means available to him to the pursuit of historical truth, but even more so, struggling in a quasi-militant way without ever departing from scientific methodology for the well-being and the future of Cyprus. Always concerned and worried, always frank and honest, always ready to offer advice, suggestions, and ideas. He participated in think tanks, he organized conferences, contributed, as I said earlier, and as we all know, many articles in reviews and journals, published several books, got involved in debates, wrote many articles in newspapers and magazines. He was omnipresent. He interacted with numerous political leaders, including all the presidents of Cyprus, except, of course, Archbishop Makarios. Andreas was just a teenager when Makarios passed away. And held positions next to presidents, as well as other political personalities. He devotes a chapter on a critical assessment of them all, focusing on their ways of dealing with the Cyprus problem and managing crisis and other important issues, and assessing at the end of the day their responsibilities and their legacies. I will not delve further into the details of the book at hand. The content is impressively rich and written in a reader-friendly way. I would just add a few words concerning the constant dialectical methodology of Andrea Theophanus. Throughout the book, rather than a mere presentation of relevant factors, of facts and a narrative of events and developments, he focuses on the interactions, on the influence of various factors. He is in a constant search of causalities to the extent that clear causality exists, of course, or that there is inevitability in international relations or in political developments. He cites numerous examples in order to demonstrate how things worked in similar cases, presents quotes from international players, and examines the broader repercussions of other conflicts, including for Cyprus. This is why he devotes, for instance, a whole chapter on the repercussions of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Of course, when the author, throughout the book, expresses his strongly held positions, it goes without saying that the reader, even candid and full of goodwill, will not most probably agree with all his views. This is, however, one of the strengths of the book. It invites to an animated debate with arguments and convictions, knowing fair well that at the end of the day, there is no absolute truth on how things would have evolved if. Even more so when it comes to charting the course of action for the future in order to solve the problem and for the country to fully take its stride as a working democracy, fulfilling the social contract with its citizens and fully assuming its place in the firmament of European and world affairs. In this regard, I would like to give you only one example, which brings us to the core of the nature of the sought-after solution for the Cyprus problem. From the outset, the author warns us in the introduction that taking all relevant factors into consideration, it is obvious that the conditions for a viable federal settlement of the Cyprus problem do not currently exist. The way this assertion is formulated is quite puzzling. Does the author believe that the federal solution is in its inception intrinsically bad and unworkable? Are his reservations and objections ideological or political? What is the sense of the word currently? Does it mean that the required conditions have existed in the past and might exist in the future but do not exist now? And what are all those relevant factors taken into consideration? Is it a good or a bad thing to pursue a federal solution or to believe in the bi-communal, bi-zonal federation with political equality as described in the relevant resolutions of the Security Council of the United Nations? What are the other options available? What is the realm of the feasible? Of course, throughout the book, Andreas goes back and forth and examines the issue from various perspectives. Towards the end, he devotes several pages on the concept and compares it with what he calls other theoretical options for the solution, spanning from the unitary state to the annexation of the occupied territories by Turkey. He proceeds then to propose guidelines for the resolution of the Cyprus problem and for a normal state based on an evolutionary approach. I think that the reader must always be entitled to expect a cathartic approach and a course of action stemming from the current state of affairs, bearing in mind that not only the status quo is not static, as the author recognizes in page 230, but it is worsening by the day in a way that is rendering most of the theoretical options envisaged, even the one or two that might sound attractive to the ones or the others, completely unrealistic and fictional. At the same time, is it also really very accurate to state that the exact content of the concept of bi-zonal, bi-communal federation remains undefined? Page 227. If indeed I am allowed to be a bit critical towards Andreas, I would say that the analysis does not fully take into account one of the most fundamental elements, which in my view is the new context created by the accession of Cyprus to the European Union, and which explains for me to a great extent why what we achieved in 2017 was much better than the announced plan, and we were much closer to a solution. And also how the European Union and its legal and institutional structures, the four freedoms, the implementation of the principles of complementarity, proportionality, and subsidiarity, with the supranational dimension and the transfer of sovereign competences to EU institutions, could make the federal system much more functional and workable. Isn't it important to see to what extent the famous phrase of Jean Monnet, when a problem looks intractable, change the context, and if this phrase and to what extent is vindicated? Wasn't this part of the logic and of the main thrust of our European journey? All of this, along with the acquis of the negotiations and with the three freedoms, movement, settlement, acquisition of property, and the fair solution to the territorial property and settler issues, shift the focus from the internal and governance dimension to the issues of security, guarantees, and troops, and exposes the real obstacles to the settlement. As the author, with perspicacity, notes in page 112, discussing the collapse in Montana, it appears, he says, and I quote, it was the issue of guarantees and the presence of foreign troops that was the reason for the failure to reach agreement. I couldn't agree more, Andreas. It is of crucial importance to highlight this, in particular, bearing in mind the rhetoric of Sintar and of Ankara when they insist on the two-state solution, because they say the bicommunal, bizonal federation collapsed in Montana. How? And why, Mr. Clark? Why? In this regard, please bear with me just for a couple of minutes to give you my testimony for the issue of governance and the nature of the sought-after solution as evolved by the time of Trans-Montana. You know, throughout the years, and in particular during the last phase of the negotiations, we had a lot of discussions about bicommunal, bizonal federation, and by the time of Trans-Montana, we had just two outstanding issues when it comes to governance. There was a disagreement concerning the positive vote of Turkish Cypriots in all decisions. And though in our discussions with Hostil Nami, we were discussing where this was really absolutely necessary, etc., Mr. Akinji was insisting on having positive votes everywhere. There was a second disagreement, and it was on the issue of joint decisions by the President and the Vice President, our side insisting that in such a case of disagreement, we go to the deadlock resolving mechanism, and the Turkish Cypriot side insisting that no, in such a case, it is a veto. So the Secretary General in Trans-Montana proposed that only on issues that are fundamental for the interest of either community, we require a positive vote. So, all in all, in Trans-Montana, there were no real issues concerning governance left beyond the issue I was mentioning of, what happens if there is a disagreement in joint decisions. So, and of course, Turkey side still today tries to say that the reason had to do with the nature of the solution, nothing at all. I have to add that 2 years later, in Berlin, in November 2019, there was the meeting of the leaders with the Secretary General, with the 2 leaders. I was asked by the Secretary General, because they were discussing about the governance, what were the outstanding issues. So I explained both about joint decisions and about the problem with, if you like, the positive vote. And I think that it is very important to underline here that Mr. Akinci stated at that point, I'm ready and willing to accept. So, of course, after that, there was COVID, there was postponement of the elections in the north, and then we had Mr. Tatar, and we have what we have. Ladies and gentlemen, I will end my presentation by congratulating Andreas Theophanus and wishing a very nice trip to his Καλοτάξιδο, Andrea. And I respect the hope for every success in all his future endeavors. Looking forward to the next delivery. Thank you very much.
Okay, before I give the floor to Andreas, being a scholar of comparative politics myself, I want to highlight some of the methodological qualities of Andreas that both of our speakers have presented. Mr. Georgiadis emphasized the rationality in the way Andreas develops his arguments, his realism and step-by-step approach, and also his commitment to infusing scientific approaches to the study of the Cyprus problem, but also in proposing ways out of the dead ends. And Mr. Mavrogiannis emphasized the dialectical methodology of Andreas, his insistence on creating a narrative, and the comparative logic of Andreas' arguments. With this, allow me to say a few highlights, methodological highlights. I give the floor to our distinguished friend, Professor Andreas Theophanus, for his comments and his responses to what we have heard so far. Andreas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Minister, Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear friends. I want to start with thanks. First of all, the distinguished speakers, Mr. Georgiadis and Mr. Mavrogiannis. Thank you very much for taking the time and for your analysis and flattering comments. I also thank my colleague, Dr. Yannis Katsouridis, for chairing this session. I want to thank many people who helped me, but it's impossible to do so. I will refer only to 3 people in my office. My PA, Styliana Petru, Mary Varda, research fellow at the center and PhD candidate, and Maxime Pekouche, student of the Department of Politics and Governance, and my family for their support and patience with me. And I also thank you for being here this evening. Well, it has been a long journey. This is the outcome of research work of primary and secondary for many years. I want to highlight some major points. What I would say is that I tried, and I think I have been mostly successful, to provide an objective account of what happened, and also to give an analysis. In what happened to Cyprus in 1974 and what has been happening, naturally there are exogenous and endogenous elements. Although we have our responsibilities, I think the tragedy of 1974 was mostly exogenously driven, and I would also say developments since then are affected to a great extent by exogenous factors. That does not mean that we don't have our responsibilities for trying to influence our national path. I would also say the following. That has been a major issue to me. The examination of the role and the importance of international law and the realpolitik in international relations. I would say that international law has been overestimated its importance both in Cyprus and Greece and in other countries. I wish it was that factor that determined international politics, but unfortunately it is not. It's important to have this in mind. These questions I try to address throughout the book, and I devote especially 2 chapters in addition to see this exchange. One, chapter 6, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the broader repercussions on the Cyprus problem, and the other, chapter 7, the policies of the guarantor countries and of other powers on Cyprus. Well, in the case of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when it happened, soon Russia became the most sanctioned nation in the world. In the case of Cyprus, we haven't seen sanctions against Turkey, and when Cypriot officials talk about them, they are considered to be a little bit extreme and out of context. I would also say that the term invasion and occupation, it's absent from most international fora in relation to Cyprus, and given the bicommunal dimensions, it can't even they convince Cypriots that the problem is basically bicommunal. It is bicommunal, but it has other dimensions as well: Greco-Turkish, European, international, geopolitical. I also try to address this discussion about possible missed opportunities before and after 74. I would say that before 1974, it could be possible, it was possible to arrive at a unitary state with elements of local and communal self-administration, but that was frustrated by several factors. Destabilization in Cyprus and other factors, plus the fact that there was not enough pragmatism in the Greek Cypriot community. As a matter of fact, there were sectors in the community which considered the unitary state as an unpatriotic option. And this was used by outside forces to proceed with what happened. I would also say in this result, to remind you the last opportunity, it was 13th of July 74, there was a meeting between Mr. Altigashti and Mr. Dekleris in Famagusta, finalized the draft that was supposed to be ratified by Mr. Kliridis and Mr. Bektash on July 16. This meeting never took place as we had the coup on July 15, 1974. And the turn of history changed. Following the invasion of Turkey and the summer of 1974, there was a shift in the discussions about the solution to the Cyprus problem from a unitary state to a federal solution. At first, Greek Cypriots were thinking about multi-regional bicommunal federation, then bi-regional federation, then it came to bi-zonal. There was a change of the context gradually. I would say that most Greek Cypriots, as we had seen the referenda and elections outcome, believe that the implementation of such plans would worsen the status quo for them. I examined the philosophy of plans and ideas after 74 in detail. The American, British, Canadian plan, the Guayar indicators and proposals, the Galley set of ideas, the Annan plan, and the Guterres proposals. I would say that negotiations since 74, despite convergence, they did not lead to a solution of the Cyprus problem. Yes, the issue of guarantees is the most important one, the most important thorny issue, but I would add governance as well. And I will explain what I mean. I will also say that, whether we like it or not, the negotiation framework in any conflict is to the great extent affected, or it is the outcome of the balance or imbalance of power. The Turkish Cypriot demands, for example, are an outcome of the power of Turkey. It's important to see what they were seeking before 74 and what they are thinking after 74. And also when it comes to the definition of political equality that the Greek Cypriot side has accepted. But the precise definition is not, there is not full agreement. In this respect, personally, I don't consider that accepting rotation presidency, it was wise. It doesn't mean if you accept political equality, you have to accept rotating presidency. And I want to refer to these issues in the limited time that I have. So what I've tried to do is that since these last 50 years of negotiations, 50 plus, it didn't lead to a solution, I went to the issue of methodology. And I see issues there. I think that instead of waiting for proposals to come from outside, we should make proposals. And not only as a Greek Cypriot community, but as the official state, the Republic of Cyprus. So my proposals, they have the following elements. One, it's suggestions for constitutional reform of 1960. To maintain, to maintain a federal state, a normal federal state. I'm answering the answer, what kind of a solution I want. I'm not talking about a unitary state. It's not realistic to do that after 74. But the question is that what kind of a federal system would lead to improvement of the status quo and to viability. And I don't happen to share the opinion of some people that any solution is better than the status quo. I want to be honest with you. I don't think that any solution is better than the status quo, although I'm not a lover of the status quo. That's why I'm trying to see how it can be changed. So in my methodology, I have suggestions for reform of the 1974 Constitution, and also to embark on an evolutionary process involving CBMs and other forms of cooperation. And I do consider this approach strategically as a one-way street. Why? I do not believe in a process which provides a solution in which we move from one day to the other, one state of affairs to the other, in 24 hours. Why? Under the best circumstances, we cannot ignore the mistrust and a heavy historical record. We must take calculated steps. I think this should have been done long ago, but it's never late. It's better to start late than never. So, the proposals for the normal state, I'm talking about the evolution, the continuity of the Republic of Cyprus. And why am I saying this? Because in many proposals, the continuity of the Republic, it was gray area. Cypriot Greeks would think that the Republic continues. Turkish Cypriots would mean that it's a new partnership. And Turkish Cypriots insisted to make sure that it's something new, let's have a new flag. My response to that is that no serious state debates or negotiates its own existence. After all, when Turkey invaded Cyprus in 1974, it declared that its objective was to reestablish the constitutional order. We should not have forgotten that point, and we should have used it in a narrative. Okay. The second thing, guarantees foreign troops and the Cypriot army. Well, obviously the system of guarantees of 1960 cannot continue. They were part of the problem. In 74, you had Greece making a coup, Turkey invading, and Britain did not live up to the expectations. It was taking pictures, mostly. It did not live up to its expectations. Presidency and governance. Well, it's a long chapter. I want to be, use only the time that I have. With the presidency, I have suggested long ago the American model of president and vice president common ticket. If I want to become a president of the republic, I have to take a Turkish Cypriot with me in the same ticket and vice versa. Turkish Cypriot wants to become president, he can take a Greek Cypriot with him. And that should be one man, one vote. In the Senate, I mean, like in the upper house, it's 50-50. In the lower house, it's 75 or 70-30. That's there. But I think the presidency, it's important. Why? One of the problems of the London and Zurich constitution is that it lacked legitimacy. I'm afraid a rotation presidency, in addition to the implications of the Turkish role in Cyprus, would enhance issues of lack of legitimacy. And I think that's very important. Supreme Court and the decision and the mechanism for resolving differences. During the Gliridis-Dektash negotiations before 74, they arrived at a solution of 6 Greeks and 3 Turkish Cypriot judges. Annan plan and the rest of the plans, they were saying 4, I mean like 3 Greeks, 3 Turks, and 3 foreigners. It was like the London-Zurich agreement, which was 1-1-1. My proposal is that it's 4 Greeks, 4 Turks, and 1 from the smaller communities. Importance of the economy and of a modern state. I think this was not addressed enough. You cannot take for granted issues about the economy. Don't forget that in 2013, Cyprus collapsed while it functioned like a unitary state, the government-controlled areas. It's important to address that as well. Settlers, well, it's an issue, territorial and property and cooperation. Now, when it comes to the CBMs, there is issues about energy, Varosha, airport of Timbu, Famagusta port, the Ankara Protocol of Turkey, the steps towards reducing tensions, discussion of common interests, possibility of Turkish Cypriots having 2 seats in the European Parliament that would be additional to the 6 offered by the European Union in view of the fact that Britain left, so there is the possibility to have that as well, and generosity from the European Union. I can go into details about that. So I'm explaining this in detail, and I would say the following. This book covers a gap in the English bibliography, because many reports and articles I read, I don't find them objective, and there are many other things that are perverted. For example, one of the arguments put forward is that after 74 there has not been a solution because the Greek Cypriots, did not follow up. The Turkish narrative was that Greeks are, spoiled. They don't want to share wealth, power, and the benefits of the European Union with the Turkish Cypriots and all that. Forgetting that if the Annan plan was accepted, it would make Cyprus a protectorate and a second-class state in the European Union. By the way, since the European Union is there, Cypriot Greeks had higher expectations. And I want to say the following in relation to this. The European Union has appointed a special representative, but he is not allowed to sit in negotiations because that would make, because the European Union is biased. At the same time, Turkey is occupying power, it receives financial protocols without conditions, and the same applies in the occupied north. If, for example, there was a condition to behave, perhaps the arrest of the 5 Greeks would not have taken place. So we have to see realpolitik. I would also say the following, and Mr. Chairman, I'm finishing. How much time I have? 5 minutes, okay, that's great. I would say that it's important to see the actions of the guarantor powers and other players, United States, USSR, Russian Federation, today China, in our region, Israel, Egypt, the Arab world, the EU, the United Nations. I would say the following. In 1974, both the political system and the society were in a shock. I'm not sure that shock and confusion are completely over 51 years after. I'm not sure they are over. As a matter of fact, I suspect it's there. Yes, the survival of the Republic of Cyprus, it was a miracle. The accession to the European Union was a great achievement, but it's important to mention the shortcomings. What is the narrative of the Greek Cypriot side of the Republic of Cyprus? As a matter of fact, each political party has 2 narratives, each political party. The hardliners and the softliners and so on. We didn't have a narrative. The importance of a narrative was not understood. The importance of think tanks, the importance of participation in the international market of exchange of ideas, has not been understood by Cyprus. This shows lack of sophistication, and as a matter of fact, it may be one of the reasons for the level of our political system today and the crisis we are facing. It's important to debate issues, and I want to say the following. I want to raise the following. Cyprus, even in 1960, it was a bi-communal society. After 1974, this became more underlined, and federalism came to be the issue. I want to ask a question. Has the study of federalism and the study of states by ethnic and multi-ethnic issues of governance been pursued? They are not pursued. I think when it comes to federalism, it's like a gray area. Are we fully aware of the different families of federalism, and which fail and which may have a chance to better results? I think, and the issue is not economic. I know the issue is not economic. After all, Cyprus today has budget surpluses, and it also pays fines to the European Union. If it pays a small percentage of that, this could improve. So we need to reassess the role of think tanks, the sophistication of the political system. And there is another myth, that the Cyprus problem has not been resolved because of the long-term struggle. No. The long-term struggle was never pursued. Makarios declared it on 20th of July 1977. A few days he died. Even Mr. Kyprianou did not pursue that. The school of thought that he pursued it was the bizonal, bicommunal federation with what came to be known subsequently with the right content. And I appreciate that. But the long-term struggle, it was not pursued. What was pursued? If you take the negotiations, was a policy of gradual concessions with the wishful thinking that Turkey would agree eventually. And what has been the practice? Once the Greek Cypriots gave something, they will not get back something. The Turkish side would demand something new. That has been the history of the negotiations. And it's very important that we see this. So it is a myth that the long-run struggle was pursued. So to complete, I'm saying that, and again, I go back to the methodology. What I have suggested comes to methodology. I'm not saying what I am giving it is an absolute position in the sense I'm giving a methodology which can be further enriched and modified when it comes to constitutional issues and when it comes to CBMs and other forms of cooperation, and also involving the other guarantor countries and the European Union and other powers as well. And I think this is important that it is done. Cyprus, it has great difficulties, challenges. It requires sophistication to move on, and it must enhance the factors of power. And it's not only deterrence, it's the economy, it's demographics, and since we talked about unitary state, well, Turkey may not object to a unitary state if the demographic structure of Cyprus is changed even more. So we must see this as well. Of course, I want to continue, and I want to see today's lunch as a beginning to further the discussions on various issues in Cyprus and in other places as well. And again, I thank you for being here tonight with us, and I invite you all to the reception to continue our discussion over a drink and cheese. Thank you.
I think we can call it for the day. Thank you very much, Andreas. Thank you all for being here and join us at the reception.
Thank you very much.
In the
Thank you.
cafeteria in the next building.
Χαρή μου, σε ευχαριστώ πολύ.